I had always thought that our life together was like a well-oiled Swiss watch. Every morning started the same way. I woke up at 6:30, 15 minutes before the alarm clock rang, and the first thing I did was look at her serene face. Audrey was asleep with her palm under her cheek, her blonde hair spreading across the pillow like sunlight. At times like this, I often thought about how lucky I was. Tonight I slipped out of bed quietly, trying not to wake her. Audrey was working late on the final edits of her second novel, and I wanted her to get more rest. Her laptop remained open on the bedside table, a habit I'd come to terms with, though my medical pedantry sometimes protested at such trivialities. My mornings always go according to schedule. A contrast shower, 10 minutes of meditation, a habit I adopted from Audrey, making coffee in an old French press, a wedding gift from Rebecca, my wife's best friend. 3 spoonfuls of freshly ground beans, 180 seconds of infusion, no more and no less. Audrey calls me a nerd for this precision, but it's the trait that makes me a good dentist. My clinic is 15 minutes from home, in a respectable Brooklyn neighborhood. The private practice I've been building for the past 12 years has finally begun to generate a steady income. It may not be as impressive as my wife's literary successes, but I'm proud to be able to provide a comfortable life for us. At 7:20, I heard Audrey's footsteps on the stairs. She was coming down, bundled up in her favorite blue robe that I had given her last Christmas. Her hair was gathered, and there was not a trace of makeup on her face, just the way I love her best. "Good morning, Mr. Pedant," she smiled, kissing my cheek. She smelled of something subtly familiar. "How's work going?" I asked, pouring her coffee into her favorite mug labeled, "Writer at Work, Do Not Disturb." Audrey sighed and sank into a chair by the kitchen island. "Haley thinks the ending needs to be rewritten. Says it's too predictable." She wrinkled her nose as if the word left a bad taste. Haley Spencer, Audrey's literary agent, was a woman with an impeccable flair for successful books. She was the one who saw the potential in my wife's first novel when all other agencies were responding with rejections. Tall, always immaculately dressed, with short-cropped graying hair and a piercing look in her brown eyes, Haley reminded me of an English literature professor at a prestigious college. "But you said this ending was exactly what it was going to be all along," I remarked, spreading peanut paste on my toast. Audrey collected different kinds of it, and right now, our kitchen cabinet resembled a small store, from the classic to the exotic with chunks of dates and maple syrup. "Yeah, but—" Audrey stirred her coffee thoughtfully without looking up. "Maybe Haley's right. Sometimes you have to surprise the reader, go beyond the obvious." There was a note in her voice that I'd learned to recognize in our 3 years of marriage, a mixture of insecurity and stubbornness. I glanced at the clock. 7:45. I have to leave in 15 minutes to get the office ready in time for my first patient. "You know I'm always on your side. If you feel the final is right, stand your ground." Audrey raised her amazing green eyes to me, in which she read gratitude. "You always know what to say, Brad." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's why I married you." I smiled, remembering our wedding day. It had been a modest ceremony at the botanical garden, just close friends and family. Rebecca, her friend since high school, was the maid of honor and cried the most. It was Rebecca who introduced us at the opening of her bookstore, Pages and Chapters, in Park Slope. Audrey was working on her first book and moonlighting at the store at the time, and I had come in to buy a medical reference book. "Are you going to Rebecca's store today?" I asked, putting the plates in the dishwasher. Audrey nodded. "Yeah, she's organizing a little get-together with the readers. Says that after she publishes an excerpt from a new book in the Literary Review, the store's phone doesn't go silent." I noticed her nervously rubbing the sleeve of her robe, another habit that shows up when she's anxious. "It'll go fine," I assured her. "You know how much the readers love you." "I know," she tried to smile. "It's just that sometimes I think they expect too much from me. After the success of Summer Eclipse, everyone expects something special." I walked over to her and put my arm around her shoulders. "You'll do fine. You always pull through." At that moment, her cell phone rang, lying on the kitchen table. I caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar number on the screen, but Audrey quickly flipped the phone screen down. Probably just another spam, she said somehow too hastily. Don't you have to go to work? I glanced at my watch. It was indeed time to go out. I'll see you tonight? I asked, pulling on my jacket. Sure. Audrey was already looking at her phone. I'll cook something special. As I walked out of the house, I heard her answer the phone, and her voice sounded a little different, lower. After all, she's going through a busy period right now. New book, meetings with readers, revisions. It's normal for her to be a little nervous. As I got in the car, I checked my email on my work phone out of habit. The first patient today is Mrs. Donovan at 9 o'clock with her problematic wisdom tooth. Then 2 hours of work with Mr. Parker, followed by routine checkups in the afternoon. A typical day, timed to the minute. I cast one last glance at the windows of our house. The light was still on in the kitchen, and I could make out Audrey's silhouette. She was still on the phone, pacing back and forth, as she usually did when the conversation was important or unpleasant. I started the car and pulled into the driveway, trying to focus on the day's work ahead. Audrey and I were doing well. Perfect, even. A week after Audrey's second book came out, our lives began to change. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible, like a slight ripple on the surface of the water. I probably wouldn't have noticed them if it weren't for the coffee incident. Every morning for 3 years, I made us coffee. It was a ritual of sorts. 3 spoonfuls of coarse coffee, 95-degree water, 3 minutes of infusion. Audrey always said my coffee was the best way to start the day. But that morning, she hadn't even touched her cup. I bought myself a capsule coffee machine, she said, pulling the chrome machine out of the box. Saw one of these at Haley's office. Now you can make different kinds of coffee at the touch of a button. I watched her set the machine in place of our old French press and felt strangely uneasy. It wasn't about the coffee machine after all. It was just a household appliance. But Audrey had never been interested in technological innovations. She was the kind of person who preferred to write first drafts by hand in old-fashioned, leather-covered notebooks. Your book is selling beautifully, I remarked, trying to distract myself from the uneasy feeling. Rebecca says she doesn't have time to order new copies. Audrey smiled, but somehow absent-mindedly, like her thoughts were somewhere far away. Yeah, Haley says this is just the beginning. I have so many meetings now, interviews. She fell silent as her phone vibrated, an unfamiliar number again. Sorry, I have to take this. She walked out into the backyard, and I watched through the window as she walked between the beds of greens we'd planted last spring. Her free hand was gesturing vigorously, a sign that the conversation was emotional. The basil, thyme, and rosemary were already starting to wilt from the fall frosts, but the mint was still hanging on. Audrey always said mint was like her, surviving in all conditions. That evening, I stayed late at the clinic. The last patient, Mr. Hendricks, couldn't decide on the shade of veneers, and we spent an extra hour looking at different options. By the time I got home, it was almost 9 o'clock. The house was unusually quiet. Usually at this time, Audrey was working at her desk in the living room, and I could hear the tapping of her laptop keys from the doorway. But today, the living room was empty. There was an open notebook on the table. I never read her notes. It was our unspoken rule. But one heading caught my eye. Emma's character, self-destructive? I went upstairs to our bedroom. Audrey was lying on the bed, fully dressed and asleep. An open laptop lay next to her. A page of some kind of forum for writers was open on the screen. I carefully closed the laptop and covered her with a plaid. With that movement, a crumpled receipt from a fancy cafe across town fell out of her jeans pocket. The time on the receipt read 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Odd, this was usually the time Audrey worked from home. Brad? She opened her eyes, and for a second something akin to panic flashed in them. What time is it? It's almost 9. You missed dinner. Sorry, She sat up on the bed, smoothing her disheveled hair. It's been a crazy day. A meeting with readers, then Haley insisted on an interview. At the coffee shop? I showed her the check, trying to keep my voice casual. Audrey froze for a second. Oh yeah, there was a meeting with a reporter there. Haley said it was important for promo for the new book. Something in her voice sounded fake. In 3 years of marriage, I'd learned to recognize all of Audrey's intonations the way a seasoned musician recognizes fake notes. Now she was speaking too fast, as if she were speaking a prearranged text. The next morning I awoke to the sound of her voice. It was 5:30, unusually early for Audrey. She was standing at the window, holding the phone to her ear, speaking almost in a whisper. "No, I can't right now. Yes, I understand. It's hard to explain. Let's meet tomorrow, same time?" I lay still, pretending to be asleep. When she came back to bed, I could smell her favorite perfume. Strange, she didn't usually use perfume this early in the morning. At breakfast, Audrey was unusually animated. I'm thinking of starting going to the gym," she said, making an espresso in her new coffee machine. "Haley says it's important for a writer to keep physically fit. It helps the creative process." "Since when do you listen to Haley's advice about physical fitness?" I asked, remembering how until a month ago Audrey had called fitness a sophisticated form of self-torture. She shrugged. "People change, Brad. By the way, I have a meeting with the reading club tonight. I'll be back late." I nodded, watching as she put on a new pantsuit, another change to her usual closet. The suit was a navy color, perfectly accentuating her figure. Audrey had never worn one before, preferring comfortable jeans and loose sweaters. In the evening, I called Rebecca, ostensibly to confirm the time of the next Readers Club meeting. "Reading club?" I could hear the surprise in her voice. "No, nothing like that was planned for today. But Audrey stopped by this afternoon and picked up some relationship psychology books. Said it was for research for a new novel." I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Audrey came back around 11, smelling of cigarette smoke. Though she never smoked, her hair was gathered in an elegant bun. I stared at my sleeping wife and tried to figure out what was going on. Maybe it was just a side effect of success? A new life, a new social circle, new habits? But then why does she hide her meetings? And why does her voice change when she's on the phone with an unknown caller? In the morning, I found an unfolded draft of a new novel on her desk. Only one line caught my eye. Emma knew her double life would one day ruin everything, but she couldn't stop. It was stronger than her. I slammed the notebook shut and went to make coffee. In a French press, not the new coffee machine. Somehow I needed to keep at least something unchanged in this rapidly changing reality. Audrey's new book launch was to be held at Rebecca's Pages and Chapters. I purposely rescheduled the last patient so I could be there in time for the start. Parking 2 blocks away from the store, there was no closer spot. I saw an impressive line at the entrance. Some readers were holding shabby copies of Audrey's first novel, Summer Eclipse. Entering through the service entrance, I found myself in the small break room where the store employees usually took their breaks. Audrey was sitting in front of the mirror while the makeup artist applied the finishing touches of her makeup. She was wearing a black dress with an open back. Brand new, I hadn't seen it before. "Brad!" Rebecca enveloped me in a hug. She smelled like old books, a smell I'd always associated with her store. "You're just in time. There's so much going on." "Hi, honey." Audrey smiled at me through the mirror. Her eyes glittered with a sort of feverish gleam. "I'm sorry I didn't wait for you this morning. Haley insisted on an early meeting with the reporter." I wanted to reply, but that's when Haley entered the room, impeccably dressed as always in a gray pantsuit. "5 minutes, Audrey." "Oh, hello, Brad." She barely nodded in my direction, completely focused on her phone. "Do you remember what we talked about? No questions about the new novel, just general phrases." "Of course, Haley." Audrey stood up, straightening her dress. "I remember everything." And then I noticed her reach for her neck, a gesture that had appeared on her lately. On a thin chain hung a small silver key, a piece of jewelry I hadn't seen before. "New pendant?" I asked as if by the way. Audrey froze for a second. "Oh, that. A gift from a reader. Symbolic, isn't it? A key to the mysteries of the stories." She laughed nervously. The presentation began. I stood back, watching Audrey captivate the audience. She'd always been a good speaker, but today, I sensed something new in her. Some special energy bordering on obsession. She talked about her characters as if she knew them personally, as if they were real people. And then I saw him. In the far corner of the store, almost hidden by the bookshelves, stood Lance McCormick, Audrey's first husband. tall, trim, wearing an expensive cashmere coat. He was listening intently to Audrey, head tilted slightly. I remembered that habit from the pictures Rebecca had once shown me. Audrey noticed him too. For a split second, she faltered in thought, but quickly pulled herself together. Only I, who knew her every intonation, noticed the change in her voice. After the presentation, as the last readers received their signed copies, I saw Lance approaching Audrey's table. Haley was standing next to him, her posture expressing wariness. "Great performance, Audrey." His voice was exactly as I'd imagined, deep, with a slight huskiness. "You outdid yourself." "Lance," Audrey stood up. "I didn't expect to see you here. How could I miss my ex-wife's book launch, especially given the certain parallels?" I stepped forward, but Rebecca held up my hand. "Not now," she whispered. Lance pulled a book, Audrey's first novel, out of his inside coat pocket. "Reread it the other day. You know, some of the scenes seem surprisingly familiar." "I apologize," Haley interjected, "but we have an interview scheduled." Lance held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Of course, of course. It was good to see you, Audrey. Good luck with the new book. I'm sure it will be fascinating." As he walked away, I noticed Audrey clutching her new silver key in her hand. Her fingers were trembling. "What was that?" I asked on the way home. "Nothing." She looked out the car window. "It's just that Lance likes to put on shows. You know, he's a realtor, used to being the center of attention. He was talking about some parallels." "Brad, please." Her voice sounded tired. "Let's not talk about it. It's been too long a day." At home, Audrey went straight up to the bedroom, saying her head was splitting. I stayed in the living room and pulled her first novel off the shelf. I'd read it half-eyed before. I was more interested in Audrey's process of working on the book than in the plot itself. But now I began to read carefully. The story was about a woman who starts a new life after her husband's betrayal. Nothing unusual, a typical plot for a love story. But some details caught my eye. The heroine lived in the same neighborhood where Audrey and Lance used to live. Her husband, like Lance, was a realtor, and the scene where the heroine catches her husband with his mistress. That happened at the Plaza Hotel? I remembered a conversation I had with Rebecca 2 years ago. Audrey was just starting to trust me with her story. She actually caught Lance at the Plaza, with a junior partner from his agency. Audrey's phone rang upstairs. A couple minutes later, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She came down, having already changed into a tracksuit. "I need to meet with Haley right away," she said, pulling on her sneakers, "to discuss the details of the interview for tomorrow. At 11 p.m. You know Haley. There are no business hours for her." I watched her hastily pack her bag. New leather-covered notebook, phone, keys. She no longer wore the heart keychain I'd given her for our first anniversary. "Audrey," I called out. "What's going on?" She froze at the door. "What do you mean?" "You've changed. These sudden meetings, the late-night phone calls, the new clothes. Is it because of the success of the book? Or what, Brad?" Her voice became harsh. "Talk to me." "I don't know. I really don't. It's just this whole thing. Lance showing up today." She walked over to me and put her hands on my shoulders. "Honey, you're exaggerating. I'm still the same. Just working on a new book. You know what a complicated process it is." I stared into her green eyes and tried to find something familiar in them. "I have to go." She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Don't wait up for me. Go to bed." When the door closed behind her, I pulled out my phone and opened the navigator. The beacon I'd installed on her car 3 days ago showed that she wasn't heading toward Haley's office at all. I sat back in my chair, still holding her first novel. On page 124, the main character said, "Sometimes lying is the only way to find the truth." I wonder if that was based on true events too. In the last 2 weeks, I've almost stopped sleeping. Every night I lay awake listening to Audrey's breathing, trying to figure out if she was really asleep or just pretending. During the day, I started making mistakes in my work, mixing up patient charts, scheduling 2 appointments at the same time. My assistant Janet looked at me worriedly, but said nothing. That morning I woke up at 4 o'clock to the sound of laptop keys. Audrey was sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a blanket she'd brought back from her last business trip. The light of the screen reflected in her face, making it look like a mask. "Can't sleep?" I asked, even though I knew she hadn't gone to bed. I'd heard her pacing around the room all night. Brad." She didn't even look up from the screen. "Sorry to wake you up. An idea for a new scene came up. I had to write it down right away." I got up and walked over to the coffee machine. Her new toy was now standing in the bedroom as well. "To keep it from going downstairs," as she explained. I put the old French press away in the closet as an unnecessary reminder of the past. "Why don't you tell me what you're writing about?" I handed her a cup of coffee, trying to peer into the screen, but she immediately slammed the laptop shut. "You know I don't discuss unfinished work," she smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "Not even with you. Especially with you." The last phrase hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Audrey had started smoking after all, though she only did it on the balcony and always brushed her teeth thoroughly afterward. It was as if she was trying to cover up not only the smell of tobacco, but something else. At the clinic, I couldn't concentrate. Twice, I asked Janet to double-check the anesthesia. I didn't trust my hands anymore. During my lunch break, I opened the navigator. The beacon showed Audrey's car parked outside the Moonlight Cafe, a trendy new place in a bohemian neighborhood of the city. I'd never been there, but I remembered the advertising sign, a place where stories are made. In the evening, Audrey had a book club meeting with readers. A real one this time. I checked with Rebecca. Decided to stop by, ostensibly by chance. The Quill and Ink bookstore was housed in an old red brick building. Inside, it smelled of freshly ground coffee and vanilla. The owner kept a small coffee shop right in the store. Audrey sat at a table surrounded by patrons. She looked different, brighter, livelier, almost unfamiliar. Next to her sat a young man who told her something animatedly, gesticulating vigorously. His linen shirt and worn jeans screamed of deliberate carelessness, and sunlight from the high window was tangled in his disheveled dark hair. "Ah, that's Finley Thornton," Rebecca whispered to me, coming up quietly behind me. "An aspiring writer. Says he shows great promise. He and Audrey seem to have hit it off." I watched Audrey laugh at his jokes, fixing his hair with a familiar gesture, leaning closer so I could hear better. "Brad!" She spotted me and waved her hand. "Come join us. Finley's just telling us about an amazing method of character work." I walked over, shaking hands with those present. Finley gave me a quick appraising look. "Ah, so you're the dentist husband." I could hear a slight sneer in his voice. "Audrey's told me a lot about you." "Really?" I looked at my wife. "And she's told me almost nothing about you." "We met recently," Audrey interjected hastily, "at a literary seminar. Finley's working on her first novel." "What will it be about?" I tried to keep my voice casual. "About the fine line between reality and fiction," Finley pitched forward. "About how a writer sometimes loses himself in his own stories." Audrey's really helping me with the conceptualization. I noticed her nervously rubbing her silver key, the very one that a reader had supposedly given her. "By the way, honey," I took her hand. "You haven't forgotten, have you? It's the anniversary of our first date tonight." That was a lie. Our first date was in April, but I wanted to see her reaction. "Oh." She looked confused for a second. "Of course I remember. But Brad, I still have a meeting with Haley. At 9 o'clock at night?" "The publishing business doesn't sleep," Finley interjected. "Right, Audrey?" They exchanged quick glances, and I felt something snap inside. Something important that had kept me afloat all these days. At home, I opened her first novel to a random page. "Sometimes we get so caught up in creating the perfect story that we forget about real life," the main character said. "And only after losing everything do we realize that the best story is the one already written by fate." In my office, I pulled out my laptop and opened the file where I'd been recording all the oddities in Audrey's behavior for the past 2 weeks. Night calls, unexplained meetings, new clothes, changed habits, the appearance of Finley. Now all those details were adding up to some frightening picture, but I still couldn't or didn't want to make sense of it. My phone vibrated. A message from Rebecca. "We need to talk." Tomorrow at 3, at the coffee shop across from my store. It's important. Audrey returned past midnight. She smelled of an unfamiliar male perfume, tart, with notes of cedar. She went straight into the shower, and I lay in the dark listening to the sound of the water, imagining her washing away this day, this smell, this foreign life she was sinking deeper and deeper into. When she lay down beside me, I pretended to be asleep. But suddenly she spoke. You know, Brad, sometimes I think we're all just characters in someone else's book, and someone has already written our ending, and we just go to it, thinking it's our choice. I didn't respond. What could I have said? That I'm afraid of this finale? That I don't recognize my own wife? That I wake up every day hoping it's all just a bad dream? In the morning, her pillow was empty. On the bedside table was a note. I left to meet with a publisher. I'll be back late. Love, O. Rebecca was waiting for me in a small cafe across the street from her store. She sat at the far table, nervously stirring her cooled tea. I'd never seen her so anxious, usually cheerful. She wasn't herself right now. I'm sorry about the cryptic message, she started to say as soon as I sat down. But I can't keep quiet anymore. It's killing me. On the table in front of her lay a shabby, leather-bound notebook. I recognized Audrey's handwriting. She forgot it at the store yesterday. Rebecca nudged the book toward me. I didn't want to read it at first, but I happened to see my name and I opened the notebook. Audrey's handwriting became increasingly illegible toward the end of the pages, as if she'd written in a hurry or in a state of extreme agitation. Research for a new book. I read the first line. Emma must be real. She has to live. I must become her. Next came the list. Change my closet. Emma wears business suits. Learn to smoke. Emma smokes thin cigarettes. Meet at Moonlight. Perfect place for Emma. Finley =, perfect prototype for Michael. The key to room 512. Keep it with you. Brad, you do realize what's going on, right? I continued reading without answering. The pages were modeled with notes on how Emma should behave, how she should feel, how she should talk. Between the lines were pasted receipts from various cafes, theater tickets, even a dried flower. She's not cheating on you, Rebecca said quietly. At least not in the usual sense. She's living the life of her character, lives every scene she writes. I remembered all the oddities of the last few weeks, the new clothes, the changed habits, the late-night phone calls. These weren't all signs of infidelity, but rehearsals? Research for a book? When did it start? My voice sounded heavy. After the success of the first novel. Remember how realistic she described the cheating scene? Everyone thought she was just using her experience with Lance, but Rebecca fell silent, choosing her words. She actually re-experienced the scene, hired an actor, rented the same room at the plaza, recreated it down to the last detail. I remembered Audrey disappearing for entire days while working on the first book. Back then, I'd written it off as a writer's retreat. And now? Her new heroine, Emma, she leads a double life, a model wife by day and something else at night. Rebecca averted her eyes. Audrey thinks she has to live it to write truthfully. I turned the page. There was a plot outline. Emma meets a young writer. He awakens in her something she buried long ago. Not passion, no, a desire to be someone else. Every meeting they have is a new chapter in her secret life. She's not cheating on her husband physically, but emotionally. She hasn't been with him for a long time. I closed the book. Why did you decide to tell me now? Because she's taking things too far. She came to my store at 3 in the morning yesterday, said weird things, confused reality with the plot of the book, called me Claire, which is the name of Emma's best friend in the novel. I remembered Audrey had left a shopping list on the kitchen table this morning. It had Emma written at the top, crossed out, and only then Audrey. What am I going to do, Rebecca? She shook her head. I don't know, Brad, but you should have found out before. Before what? Before she completely loses herself in the story. That evening, I sat in our living room rereading my notebook. Each page revealed new details of this strange double life. Audrey described her encounters with Finley like scenes from a novel. He sat by the window, sunlight tangled in his hair. Emma felt a familiar tingling in her fingertips, a harbinger of a new story. The front door opened. Audrey had come home. She was wearing a new gray suit, her hair gathered. She looked tired, but her eyes glittered feverishly. "Hi, honey." She pecked my cheek. She smelled like cigarettes and coffee. "I'm sorry I'm so late. Had an important conversation with the publisher." "At Moonlight?" I picked up the notebook. She froze. For a few seconds, the room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. "Where did you get this?" Her voice became alien. "It doesn't matter. What matters is what it says. Who are you now, Audrey? You or Emma?" She sank into the chair without removing her coat. Her fingers reached for the silver key around her neck. "You don't understand," she finally uttered. "This isn't a game. It's a method of operation. I have to feel what she feels. Otherwise, the story will be false." "And our story? Is it real?" Audrey looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Of course it's real. It's just, sometimes a writer has to immerse himself in another reality to create something worthwhile." "And how deep are you going to dive?" She stood up, walked over to the window. A fine rain drizzled outside the glass, turning the street into a blurry watercolor. "You know what the hardest part of being a writer is?" she said without turning around. "Finding the line between truth and fiction. Sometimes it's so thin, almost imperceptible." "And you're sure you can still see that line?" She turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "This morning you signed the shopping list with Emma's name." Audrey blinked as if trying to focus her eyes. "I did? I didn't notice. And yesterday you named Rebecca Clare. That was just a disclaimer. I think about the book a lot. I get confused sometimes." I walked over to her, taking her by the shoulders. "Look at me. Who am I to you right now? Brad? Or Emma's husband?" She twitched as if from a blow. "Stop it. You're being dramatic." "I am. What's this?" I pulled a key out of my pocket, exactly like the one hanging around her neck. "Found it in the pocket of your old coat. It's from room 512, isn't it? At the Moonlight Hotel?" Audrey turned pale. "You followed me? And you forced me to. What's going on in there, in that room? Are you replaying scenes from your book? With Finley? We're just talking, discussing characters, plot? In a hotel room, at night? It's for atmosphere. That's how Emma meets Michael. Secret meetings, talking until dawn. And where does Emma end and you begin?" She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Go away. This is my home. Then I'll leave. I have a book to work on." "On the book or yourself?" She was already pulling on her coat, checking her phone. "Don't wait up for me. I have a meeting with my publisher." "With Finley, you mean?" After that night, our house turned into a theater stage. Audrey and I played the roles of loving spouses, saying the usual lines, but it all felt fake, like cardboard sets. I noticed that she stopped looking into my eyes at breakfast, as if she were afraid I'd see a reflection of my Emma in them. That morning I canceled all my patients for the first time in my 5 years on the job. Janet was shocked. I'd never allowed myself to be so unprofessional. "Dr. Everett, are you feeling okay?" Her voice on the phone sounded worried. "Maybe you need some help?" "Help? Funny word. How do you help a man whose wife is dissolving into a fictional character?" I sat in my office at home, rereading Audrey's notebook for the 100th time. Some of the pages were scribbled in her rambling handwriting, as if she'd been writing in a fever. In some places, the ink was blurred from tears. Rain. Emma's appointment schedule. Monday, 3 p.m., Moonlight Cafe, wear gray suit, pearl earrings. Wednesday, 19 o'clock, Apollo Theater, black dress, stiletto heels. Friday, 10 p.m., room 512, new perfume, chapter 7 manuscript. I opened my laptop and started looking for information about Audrey's other books. The internet turned up interviews with readers who marveled at the startling authenticity of her first novel. One literary critic wrote, "The scenes between the main characters are so real that it seems as if the author peeked through a keyhole rather than invented them. If only he knew how right he was." My phone vibrated, a message from Lance McCormick. I couldn't even remember when I'd had time to save his number. "Need to talk. In an hour at the old Jack bar?" I hesitated. Meeting Audrey's ex-husband seemed wrong. But was everything else right now? The old Jack's bar turned out to be a dark room with wood paneling on the walls and the smell of old whiskey. Lance was already waiting for me at the far table, an untouched glass of scotch in front of him. "Glad you could make it," he held out his hand. "Sorry for the suddenness of it, but I thought you might want to know something." I sat down across from him, scrutinizing the man who had once been my wife's husband. The gray was already peeking through his dark hair, but his eyes remained as piercing as they were in the old photos. "It started in our second year of marriage," he began, twirling a glass in his hands. "Audrey was working on her first story. I didn't pay much attention to her research for credibility at the time. Thought all writers worked that way." He pulled a shabby envelope from his inside jacket pocket. "Found this the other day. Going through some old stuff. I think you should read it." The envelope contained a letter written in Audrey's familiar handwriting. "Dear Lance, I'm sorry to have to report this by letter, but I can't do otherwise. I've been living a double life these past few months. No, I haven't cheated on you, at least not physically. But my heroine, Sarah, had to survive her husband's betrayal, and I created that situation. I hired an actress, rented a room at the plaza, arranged to catch you with her. You didn't cheat on me. Cheating was part of my plot. But I couldn't write that scene without really living it. I'm so sorry. I know it's crazy, but I can't create otherwise. Audrey." "She sent it a week after she supposedly caught me with her mistress." Lance chuckled bitterly. "By then, all our friends already thought I was a scoundrel. Reputations were ruined. But you know what the worst part was? She was really hurting when she caught us. Her pain was real, even though the situation was staged." I sat stunned by this revelation. So the whole story of Lance cheating on me, which had traumatized Audrey so much, was a fabrication? Part of her method? Why didn't you tell the truth? Who would I have told? Who would have believed it? Besides, he took a sip of scotch. I saw her writing. It was like an obsession. She could stay up 24 hours a night living the lives of her characters, sometimes calling me by other people's names. And then you came along. Ia? Not you specifically, the character. A good proper man who saves the heroine after a betrayal. She was looking for you and found you. I remembered our meeting at Rebecca's bookstore. A chance encounter. Or was it? Are you saying that our marriage... I'm not saying anything, just be careful. When Audrey is immersed in a new story, she loses the boundaries of reality. And now, with this new book... Have you read her drafts? No. But I know that look. It's the same one she had when she was working on my cheating scene. He finished his scotch. You know what the ironic thing is? I really did love her. Maybe that's why I didn't retract anything. I didn't want to ruin her world. When I got home, Audrey was sitting at her desk in the living room. In front of her lay an open laptop and some photos. "Where have you been?" she asked without looking up. "I thought you had patients today." "Canceled, met with someone. With Lance?" She looked at me now, and I saw something akin to fear in her eyes. "I saw you at the bar. Followed you like you followed me. He told me about the affair, about how it didn't happen." Audrey stood up so abruptly, she knocked over her coffee cup. The dark liquid spread over the pictures. "Didn't happen? Didn't happen?" Her voice trailed off. "And the pain? It was real. Every tear, every sleepless night, it was real. But the situation? Who cares who created the situation? The feelings were genuine. I really experienced a betrayal, which you organized yourself." She walked over to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. She was wearing the same gray suit, Emma's suit. "You don't understand. To write about pain, you have to feel pain. To write about love, you have to fall in love? With Finley, for example?" She turned around sharply. "That's different. Finley, he's just helping me understand Emma." "And who helps me understand you?" I walked over to her, taking her by the shoulders. "Where are you, Audrey? Where's my wife?" "I'm here," she whispered, but her eyes were wandering, not focusing on me. It's just that sometimes the line between reality and fiction gets so thin that you can walk through it, that I have to walk through it. For the story, for the truth. What truth, Audrey? The one you made up? She released herself from my arms. I have to go. I have a meeting. With Emma? Or with yourself? But she was already putting on her coat, checking her purse. Familiar movements that had become foreign. Don't wait up for me, she said at the door. There's an important scene tonight. I was alone in the living room. In the desk drawer, I found another notebook. The first page read, Notes for the final chapter. Emma must make a choice to return to reality or stay in the world she created. But what if reality is just another story? And then who is the real me? I closed the notebook and let myself cry for the first time all day. The next 2 weeks turned into a strange spectacle. Audrey came home less and less often, and when she did, she seemed like a ghost of herself. She could sit at her laptop for hours, forgetting to eat or sleep. I found cups of untouched coffee all over the house, in the bedroom, in the bathroom, even on the windowsill in the living room. She had never left unfinished coffee before. One morning, I discovered that she had rearranged all the furniture in her office. This is what Emma's workspace looks like, she explained when I asked. Her own photos had disappeared from the walls, replaced by paintings of unfamiliar landscapes. These are the places Emma goes, she said with the tone of a tour guide. That afternoon, I decided to go to Moonlight. Not to follow, just to understand. The cafe was housed in an old building with tall arched windows. Inside, it smelled of fresh pastries and coffee, and soft jazz was playing. I sat down at a table in the corner, ordered an espresso. Are you Audrey's husband? The waitress, a young girl with a short haircut, smiled at me. She comes here a lot, always orders a cinnamon latte and a blueberry pie, although she used to say she hated cinnamon. I knew it. Audrey really hated cinnamon, but Emma apparently loved it. She usually sits over there. The waitress nodded at a table by the window. With that handsome writer, they're so passionate about some book they're discussing. Sometimes they stay up until closing time. I stared at the empty table by the window and imagined them sitting there, Audrey and Finley. She in her gray Emma suit, he in his sloppy bohemian clothes. What are they talking about? About the book? Or about that fine line between reality and fiction that Audrey so loves to cross? I got home late. Audrey was in the bedroom, sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered sheets of paper. I can't finish this scene, she said without raising her head. Something's not right. It's all wrong. I picked up one of the sheets. The handwriting was uneven, some words scrawled several times. Emma looks at her reflection in the mirror and doesn't recognize herself. Who is the woman in the gray suit? The woman she has become, or the woman she always wanted to be? Or maybe it's just a role she's been playing for so long she's forgotten her real lines. Audrey, I sank down next to her on the floor. Would you stop? Enough of what? This. All of it. You're losing yourself. She raised her eyes to me red from lack of sleep, with dilated pupils. I'm not losing myself. I'm finding myself. Through Emma, I'm realizing something important about myself. Like what? That life doesn't have to be simple, that you can be different. That... She was interrupted by the phone ringing. I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Finley. I need to take this. She jumped up, nearly knocking over a glass of water. At 2 a.m? It's important. For the book. She slipped out of the room, but I could still hear scraps of conversation. Yes. No, I didn't sleep. Of course I remember about tomorrow. Number 512, as usual. I sat down on the bed, holding the picked-up sheet in my hands. The ink was blurred in several places, from tears, from the rain, or from that invisible line between reality and fiction that was becoming increasingly blurred. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of falling drops. Audrey was standing at the window, holding a cup of cold coffee. She was wearing a black dress I'd never seen before. I have to finish my book, she said without turning around. There are a few chapters left. And then what? Then... She fell silent, as if the question had never occurred to her. Then there will be a new book, a new story. A new heroine you'll turn into? She finally turned to me. You don't understand. This isn't a game. It's a way to learn the truth. Whose truth, Audrey? Yours or Emma's? Is there a difference? In that moment, I realized I was really losing her. Not because of Finley, not because of the meetings at the hotel, because of this weird obsession with living other people's lives, dissolving into made-up stories. At the clinic, I couldn't concentrate. Twice I asked Janet to double-check patient charts. I was afraid of mixing up appointments. On my lunch break, I went to see Rebecca. She was in the back of her store, sorting through new arrivals. She put her books down when she saw me. She came by yesterday. Rebecca sat down on a stack of boxes, said some strange things about how reality is overrated, that real life is in the stories. What am I supposed to do, Rebecca? She shook her head. I don't know. Maybe let her finish this book. Get to the end of the story? What if the end of the story is the end of my wife? At that moment, my phone rang. Haley. Brad, you have to come over. Her usually confident voice trembled. Now, she's not herself. Where? In my office. Brought the new chapters and just come by. Haley's office was in a modern building. The receptionist ushered me straight into the office. Audrey sat in a chair, clutching a stack of papers in her hands. Haley stood at the window, tapping her fingers nervously on the sill. I can't publish this, she said when I walked in. It's not literature anymore. It's some kind of diary of madness. You don't understand anything! Audrey jumped up, scattering the sheets. This is the best thing I've ever written. It's the truth. Whose truth, Audrey? Haley turned to her. Yours? Emma's? Or the woman you're trying to be? What difference does it make? Isn't that the point of literature, to blur the lines between reality and fiction? Not at the cost of your own identity. I picked up one of the fallen sheets. Emma no longer remembered who she used to be. The woman who made her husband coffee in the mornings, who hated cinnamon and loved old movies, she seemed like a character from someone else's book. The real Emma was born in the semi-darkness of room 512, in conversations with a man who understood her better than she understood herself. Brad, Haley put a hand on my shoulder. You have to do something. She's losing touch with reality. Don't you dare talk about me like I'm not here. Audrey grabbed her bag. I'm leaving. I have a meeting. With Finley? I asked. With Michael! She shouted out and mumbled, realizing her mistake. Michael was the name of a character in her book whose prototype was Finley. When the door closed behind her, Haley sank heavily into her chair. I've seen different kinds of writing madness, she said, but this is something new. She's not just writing a story. She's living in it. And now what? Now? Haley looked at the pages scattered on the floor. Now we just have to wait to see how the story ends. In the book. And in life. I walked out of the building into the drizzling rain. A notification glowed on my phone, a message from Audrey. Don't expect me tonight. Emma has a choice to make, and so do I. A week had passed since the meeting in Haley's office. Audrey hardly ever showed up at home, and if she did, she didn't come in for long. To change clothes, get some things, check the mail. I started finding strange objects all over the house. Strange earrings on the bedside table, an unfamiliar scarf in the hallway, notes with handwriting similar to Audrey's but a little sharper, more angular Emma's handwriting. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of the door opening made me wince. It was 3 a.m. Audrey walked into the kitchen without turning on the light. I barely recognized her in the semi-darkness, a tight suit, high-heeled shoes, her hair in a tight bun. She flicked the switch on the coffee machine. Can't sleep? She asked in a casual tone, as if we'd seen each other this morning at breakfast. Where have you been? Working. She pulled out her new cup, a dark blue one with a gold rim. The old one labeled, "To the best wife," I'd found in the trash a week ago. In room 512? She froze for a second, then slowly turned to me. Are you following me? And you're giving me a choice? The coffee machine hummed softly, filling the kitchen with a familiar aroma. I used to associate that smell with cozy breakfast together. Now it smelled like someone else's life. I'm writing an important book, Brad. She sat down across from me, carefully straightening the folds in her skirt. Possibly the most important book of my life. In your life? Or Emma's? She wrinkled her nose as if from a toothache. Don't get me started. Don't start what, Audrey? The conversation about you losing yourself? About you living someone else's life? Not someone else's. She raised her voice, then caught herself and continued more quietly. Emma is a part of me, the part I've always wanted to explore. What about the part that was my wife? She turned back to the window. A fine rain drizzled behind the glass, turning the nighttime city into a blurry watercolor. You know, she said after a long silence, sometimes I think that woman you married was a character too. A good wife, supporting her husband, making coffee in the morning. Maybe I was just playing a role? And now you're not acting? She stood up abruptly, spilling her coffee. Dark drops spread across the white tablecloth, the same one we'd bought on our first Christmas together. You don't understand, I'm real now. Real? In someone else's suit, with someone else's habits, with someone else's name in your head? With Finley, I can be me. With Finley, you can be Emma. I stood up, walking over to her. But Emma is a fiction, Audrey, a character. Ink on paper. No, she recoiled from me. She's alive. I can feel her, you know? She lives inside me, breathes me, speaks with my voice. And kisses Finley with your lips? The slap sounded unexpectedly loud in the silence of the night. I looked at my wife and didn't recognize her. The flushed face, the burning eyes, the trembling hands. Nothing happened between us, she hissed. Nothing physical, we just understand each other. Like Emma and Michael in your book? She grabbed her bag, began hastily gathering the papers scattered across the table. I'm leaving. Where? To his place? To my place, to room 512. There I can write. Where I can think. There you can be Emma? She froze at the door. You know what the worst part is? You're right. That's where I could be Emma. And that's the only thing that makes sense right now. When the door slammed shut behind her, I was alone in the kitchen, amidst the ghosts of our past life. Pictures on the table, unfinished coffee in someone else's cup, wet footprints from her shoes on the floor. The ringing of the phone made me flinch. Rebecca. Is she at your place? No, she just left. Why? She stopped by the store an hour ago, was weird. Talked about how she'd found a way to make the story perfect, that she was going to give Emma a real ending. Something in her voice made me tense up. What kind of ending? I don't know, but she left it. A pause. I'll send you a picture now. A minute later, I was staring at my phone screen, a page torn from a notepad. The ending has to be flawless. Emma will realize she can't go back to her old life. She must make a choice, once and for all. Michael will meet her at their special place. He will understand. He's always understood. At the bottom of the page was scribbled in a different handwriting. Emma's handwriting. Number 512. 5 o'clock this morning. End of story. I looked at my watch. 4:15. Rebecca. My voice sounded unrecognizable. Call the police. Moonlight Hotel, room 512. Do you think she's... I don't know. But Audrey always said every story deserves a dramatic ending. I grabbed my car keys. In the hallway, I bumped into a box of old clothes. It had been there since the night Audrey had decided to update her closet to Emma's style. Out of the box fell a book, her first novel. It opened to a dedication page. To Brad, the only man who sees the real me through all my stories. I slammed the book shut and ran out into the rainy night. Somewhere in the city, my wife was getting ready to write the final chapter of her story, and I had to get there in time to stop her. Before she crossed that final line, between literature and life, between fiction and reality, between Emma and Audrey. The rain intensified as I drove up to the Moonlight Hotel. The old Art Deco building loomed darkly, only a few windows had lights on. I saw Audrey's car in the parking lot, the dark blue Volvo she'd bought after the success of her first book. In the back seat was her old red scarf, the one I'd given her for their first Christmas together. Odd that she hadn't thrown it away like the rest of her past life stuff. The lobby was empty, with only a half-asleep doorman flipping through something on his phone. I identified myself as Audrey Everett's husband. He didn't even look up, just waved toward the elevators. Apparently, he was used to her constant visits. 5th floor. The dark maroon carpeted corridor muffled his footsteps. Room 512 was at the end, around the corner. As I approached, I heard voices, muffled but discernible. "Are you sure?" Finley's voice sounded worried. "Maybe we should talk things over?" "There's nothing to discuss." Audrey's voice, no, not Audrey, Emma's, sounded cold and determined. "I've made up my mind. The old life is over." "But your husband, Brad?" She let out a short laugh that made something shiver inside me. "He's part of the past, the woman I'm no longer. He loved the image, the role I played, the model wife, the supportive spouse, domestic and predictable. And me? You? You understand the real me, the one I'm becoming." I leaned back against the wall, feeling my legs wobble. Memories flashed through my mind. Audrey making breakfast on Sunday morning, humming something to herself. Audrey falling asleep on my shoulder while watching old movies. Audrey talking excitedly about her first literary successes. Was it all an act? A role? "You know," she went on, "I've been rereading my old diaries. My God, how banal. The happy family, the cozy house, the breakfast together. It was like I was living in some sentimental novel for housewives. But now you're living in another novel." Finley's voice sounded bitter. "No, now I'm living for real. Emma taught me to be free, to be brave, to be someone else, to be me, the real me." I heard the sound of footsteps, the rustling of paper. "Here, read it." Her voice shook with excitement. "The final chapter. I finished it an hour ago. Emma's leaving, for good. Leaves a note to her husband, banal, like their whole life together. 'I'm sorry, but I have to be me,' and leaves with Michael. Into a new life, a new story. Audrey." There was alarm in Finley's voice. "It's just a book. You understand, don't you?" "No. It's more than a book. It's a release. I've packed my things, withdrawn the money from my account. We can leave right now, anywhere we want to go, start a new story." "Stop." His voice became hard. "Are you serious? Are you suggesting I run away with you? Of course, like Michael did with Emma, it would be perfect." "Jesus, Audrey." I heard him sink heavily into his chair. "Have you completely lost touch with reality? I'm not Michael. You're not Emma. It's just a book." No, you don't understand. We can what? Ruin your family? My life for what? For a story? For love. Love?" His laugh was bitter. "You don't love me, Audrey. You love the idea of me. The image you've created in your head. I'm just a character to you." "That's not true. You don't even know me. The real me. All you see is Michael, the character you made up. But our meetings, our conversations, were part of your research. I thought we were just working on the book, helping each other with the lyrics. And you've been living in some parallel world all this time." There was a heavy pause. I could hear Audrey's intermittent breathing, the creak of the chair Finley was sitting in. "So you don't understand either." Her voice turned icy. "You think I'm crazy? That I can't tell the difference between reality and fiction?" "Audrey, no, I can tell the difference perfectly. It's just that all of you're all living some kind of bland, boring life, afraid to be real. And you hide from real life in made-up stories." The sound of the slap echoed down the hallway. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out! You're just like everyone else. Like Brad with his proper life, like Haley with her publishing plans. None of you understand." "I understand everything, Audrey. I understand it too well. And you know what? You need help. Out!" The door swung open, and Finley literally flew out into the hallway. When he saw me, he froze. "How long have you been standing here?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "I'm sorry." He ran a hand over his face. "I didn't realize it was so serious. Thought it was just a writer's quirk, a method of working." "I know." He looked at the room door, then at me. "She needs help, professional help." I nodded again. He patted me on the shoulder and walked toward the elevators, slouching as if he'd aged 10 years in an instant. I knocked on the door. "I told you to get out!" Audrey yelled. "It's me!" Silence. Then the sound of footsteps, the click of the lock. She opened the door, disheveled, with smeared mascara, in that very same gray Emma suit. "Oh, it's you." She turned away, walked into the room. "What, you come to rescue your wife?" I looked around the room. There were sheets of paper scattered everywhere, an open suitcase on the bed, a stack of books next to it. On the table was an empty bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "So you heard everything?" She lit a cigarette, blowing the smoke into the ceiling. "Satisfied now? Now you know your perfect wife is just lost." I stepped toward her. "Between your stories and real life." "Don't!" She recoiled. "Don't take that condescending tone. Do you think I don't see the way you've been looking at me these last months? With pity, with misunderstanding, with love, Audrey. I look at you with love, even now." She laughed, bitterly, hysterically. "With love? To whom? To the woman I've been pretending to be all these years? You never pretended. You were just lost." "No!" She threw some papers at me. "You don't understand anything. I found me. The real me. In a fictional character. Emma is more real than all of you. She's alive. She's ink on paper, Audrey. And you're my wife. The woman who likes blueberry muffins for breakfast, hates cinnamon, falls asleep to old movies. Enough. I'm free." "Dismissed?" I picked up her notebook from the floor. "You're trapped in a cage of your own fiction. You're not living. You're playing a role, and not even your own." She sank to the bed, clutching the crumpled manuscript in her hands. "Go away." "No." "Go away! I won't go back. I'm not going to be that doll." "You were never a doll. You were you. Real. Alive. And now I'm dead?" She looked up at me, eyes full of tears. "Now you're lost. But I'm going to help you find your way back. And can you accept that? Accept everything that happened and move on?" I sat down next to her, taking her trembling hands in mine. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Probably Rebecca or the police. But I didn't answer it. We were sitting in a half-dark hotel room among the scattered pages of someone else's life, and I was holding my wife who was finally starting to come back. Or was she? I didn't know, just like I didn't know how our own story would end.